for coming out tonight. Hope you're all doing very well. We're in for a special treat tonight. We have Robert Buxton here with us. And Robert is a classical pianist and public speaker who has served at East Carolina University and UNC Chapel Hill. Tonight's program is a tribute to the great violinists of the past. So please help give a warm Searstone welcome to Robert, and hope you enjoy.
Thank you very much, Tom, and all of you for being here. Thanks also to Tom for helping me find the room here. I really appreciate it. So this is an odd program of sorts. I'm playing violin music arranged for the piano. And you know, it starts with a story. It was a crazy pandemic story. I think we all have one or two. What happened was I watched some documentaries about violin in the past. Particularly, there's one PBS documentary called Art of Violin, which I highly recommend. The only problem is you might want to become a violinist when you see it. That's what happened to me. I saw it, I decided, well, you know, it's a piano, it's a big instrument. Anyway, violin's portable, it's so great. And you have these people like David Oistrakh and Yehudi Menuhin and all these great characters, and they play it. It's unbelievable. So I told my wife, who's a pianist also, the next day, I told her my idea. And she was quiet and gave me this look, which I know all too well. And I said, so, what do you think? And she said, well, I know somebody who switched instruments like that. And it took them 15 years to recalibrate to it or whatever. And they had to practice like crazy. And don't forget, we have a 4-month-old son, we have 2 kids and 2 boys. So, and she passed, just like 4 kids. So, you know, she said, I don't know if this is a great idea. I said, okay, you're right. Voice of reason always, but plan B was to just play. And I found a few arrangements for the violin, the Liszt, Paganini that I studied. I'm going to play a couple, 1 or 2 of them tonight. And there's other pieces like that. And then what happened was, this was a while ago, this whole crazy project started, maybe a year and a half ago. But I just kept finding and continue to keep finding more and more pieces, which gives me more excuse to pretend to be a violinist. And that's what I'm doing on the piano, because I was essentially too lazy to switch. So the first piece I'm going to play is, well, the first set of pieces I'm going to do, actually, they're not specifically for the violin, but they're often played on the violin. There's many violin recordings of them. And this first piece is by a French composer named Gossec, G-O-S-S-E-C, who's not played so much now. He wrote wonderful symphonies and especially operas. And he lived in the 18th century in Paris. And this gavotte is from an opera called Rossini. Gavotte is a dance, so I call it the dance sequence in French operas. All French operas, I don't know, most all of them have dance sequences interspersed throughout. It's like in North Carolina, you need to have Texas Pete sauce with your barbecue. So in French opera, you have to have dances. And think about Wagner, for example, who came later. Can you imagine Wagner having dances in Tristan and Isolde or something? Well, funny thing I found out was that when Wagner, I think it was the Ring Cycle was done there, or maybe it was Tannhäuser or something, but the French put in dances. And he was not thrilled, but this is just how important it is. So that's what this gavotte is, and it's often played on the violin. It's a wonderful recording by Misha Elman, who was this Odessa-born violinist and personality. Misha Elman, this is a video from 1926. It's on YouTube. And forgive me, I might be ranting on too many things, but I'm obsessed with these old recordings. And this is one of my favorites. And that's why I learned this, because we Misha Elman version plays Gossec gavotte. One more thing is that I find this piece is very funny. Well, before mentioning personality of it is this is written right before the French Revolution. So for me, I'm imagining the world of Versailles. And come to think of it, when I drove in here, there's something about Searstone that interesting. It looks a little bit like Versailles, doesn't it? That's what I thought. But this was right before the French Revolution that this was written. And that whole world, the powdered wigs, the courtly dances, was to be gone shortly after. For better or worse, I'm not sure, but probably better. It's hard to say. So, yeah, this piece, what you're going to hear, I call it the musical hiccup it has. That's what I find so funny about it. It's, see, it's just, you know, it has a hiccup to it. So, here it is. It's fun, I think, and a lot of music from that time period, the 18th century, is without the word neurosis, you could say, like the 19th century, where we're about to go. And I'm jumping around a lot. I'm not going in exactly chronological order. And I've been thinking about this. The only real theme of this is the fact that this is all done on the violin, usually, more so than the piano. But there's just so many different ideas and tangents. So forgive me if this is not a unified presentation. So the next piece is a vocal arrangement, actually, but it's always frequently done on the violin. Also the cello. I recently heard Daniel Shafran, a great Russian cellist, Soviet cellist, played this recording. So this is called Après un rêve, After a Dream, by Gabriel Fauré. And this is, again, it's a vocal piece. Fauré lived in the late 19th century, even early 20th century. And so, you know, you wouldn't maybe say that he's an impressionist composer, but to me, he either is or he's right on the cusp of it. So I would associate the paintings of Monet, Renoir, Pissarro, etc., with Fauré's style. And furthermore, this is like 100 years or so after the Gossec piece I just did. And it's totally different, but I think in many ways it sounds more characteristically French, you could say. What I hear are these effects effects. I'll show you one such effect. Like you have things like which reminds me of French cooking. And by the way, I think there's food over there. I can smell. It's really nice. I like food, maybe sometimes more than violin and piano, but that's different. But in French cooking, and this is a strange analogy, but somehow I think it works. French cooking is all about the sauce. Usually many sticks of butter in that sauce. And I think that this piece is all about those effects, those musical sauce, if you will. Strange comparison in Hungary. But so here is the piano by Gabriel Fauré. It's arranged for piano by the oddball Australian composer Percy Granger. More on him later. Very French. Now another arrangement of Percy Granger. It's just this project, this violin project, what I love about it is, playing these arrangements and all these things. It's led me down so many different rabbit holes, and one of them is this weird guy, Percy Granger, who's a brilliant Australian pianist and composer. There's some recordings of him. Lived at the turn of the 20th century. And some of the reasons I mentioned is bizarre. I probably shouldn't mention here, but I can tell you some odd quirks of his personality. He liked backpacking. I don't know that many pianists who do. Classical, that is. And he would go from town to town in Australia, like camping, with a backpack. And he'd show up right before the performance. I guess I didn't show up too early today, but he would come like right before, but he had this camping knapsack on, and he would just plop it down right next to the piano and start playing. I don't know when the guy practiced, but that's, I don't know. He loved physical manual labor. Again, I don't know many classical pianists who do. Let's see, he would take a ship, because he didn't fly in those days at the term. I guess some people did. If you were going across the Atlantic, he would take a ship to them. And he would beg to be allowed to work shoveling coal in the boiler room. Anyway, there's many more. He made his own clothes. He ate a very strange diet. He was riding a bicycle everywhere. Someone told me maybe he could have lived in Brooklyn today. But that's beyond the point. But he did this beautiful Fauré arrangement there. I did, and he did an arrangement of the Londonderry air "O Danny Boy," which I'm going to play right now. It's an Irish folk tune. The text is very poignant. It's probably, I may be wrong, but from what I understand, it's a father speaking to his son who's about to go to war, to the First World War, the Great War at that time. But the text is like so many great texts. You know, it's ambiguous enough that that's not necessarily what it's about. But anyway, this is an unfamiliar rendition of a very familiar piece. And why violin? Because violinists play this, especially as an encore. Fritz Kreisler played it a lot, and Iver Giblis, another violinist that I adore so much. So here is the "O Danny Boy," the Londonderry air, arranged by Percy Minch. Need to stay hydrated in this heat, so. Next, I'm going to play a short piece by Sergei Rachmaninoff. This is called Margaritsky in Russian, or daisies in English, the flowers, daisies. He wrote this as a vocal piece, a song in 1916, which is a little bit similar to the Gossip, but 1916 is the year right before the Russian Revolution of 1917. And Rachmaninoff was an aristocrat, but what's interesting is he didn't grow up with much privilege because his father, when he was young, gambled away the family money. So, but the fact that he was of that lineage of an aristocrat, when the Russian Revolution happened, you could see the writing on the wall. He and his family got out. They came first to, they lived in Dresden, then they lived in New York, and ultimately in Beverly Hills, California. Apparently he liked it. But anyway, Rachmaninoff, if you look at his life, he was, you could say, maybe even plagued with what we would now call clinical depression, possibly. He may have had Marfan's syndrome, too. He was very tall and very big hands, but a lot of pain, too. Pains and aches there. But, artistically, I would say he was, he had so much nostalgia, so much, he was even, a few examples of it, he didn't adapt his musical style, his romanticism in the 20th century, when so many were doing that, like Stravinsky, Schoenberg, and Bartok, etc. He did not, he couldn't, he held on to his, his memory, his past, his nostalgia for that old 19th century way. And now he's being, people or musicians are finally saying, rightly so, I think, that no, he was not just a regressive composer. No, he had his own unique 20th century style. It just didn't sound, avant-garde or whatnot. But he also, I heard he didn't even want to learn English. He loved America, but he was so deeply Russian that he learned how to say hello, goodbye, that's it. His home in Beverly Hills apparently was an exact replica of his home in Russia. He wanted to just be, he was so Russian, and this is familiar for me because my mother is from the Soviet Union, and my uncle, Boris, who recently died, and I grew up partially in that Russian culture, in that world. Just had some incredible Russian food from my mother. They lived, my parents lived in Chapel Hill, so Golden Hex supermarket right here in Cary. I didn't know any, that's not word. They're not paying you to advertise on this. But Rachmaninoff, if you were in North Carolina, you'd probably go there first. So anyway, this piece, Daisies, he's still in Russia, but not for long after this. And I think he's reflecting on his summers as a child that he would spend in the countryside with his grandmother. That's what I think this piece is about. We can never know for sure what a piece is about, but that's what I would say it is. And those, as my mother described, wide Russian meadows with wildflowers, with daisies. That's what I think this piece is about. So, here it is. Daisies by Rachmaninoff. vocal piece that violinists play. A lot. This is the songs my mother taught me by Dvorak, arranged by a Russian composer, Schut, S-C-H-U-T. I don't know too much about the arranger, but maybe I want to. But this is, yeah, it's a vocal piece, and Fritz Kreisler and many others played this on violin. It's commonly done on violin. But Dvorak was a Czech composer in the 19th century and was very inspired by folk music, especially the music of his native Central Europe, Czech Republic, so gypsy music. And I would say maybe klezmer too, because gypsy and klezmer music, that's the folk music of Central to Eastern Europe. So this is from a set of songs called the Gypsy Songs, so it makes sense. What else would I say about this? The text is quite beautiful. If I could sing it, which is another thing I don't do, violin and singing, it's, the text goes something like, I recall the songs my mother taught me, and now I teach them to my children. It's really, really beautiful. I had a quick story about Dvorak. So I know somebody, I won't say who it is, I know someone in the music world who absolutely hates Dvorak with a burning passion. And I asked this person why, and they said, I don't know, I can't say. It reminds me of being on farms. So, well, I grew up in New Jersey, outside New York City. There's no farms to be seen, so. I said, really? And he said, yeah, I can almost, and he got very mad, he said, I could smell the cows in Dvorak's music. And I said, you've given two more reasons to love Dvorak. I always loved Dvorak. One is that you hated him. I think that strong feelings are a sign of something good. It can be. And also the fact that the farm thing, I didn't think about that, but I love farms because I didn't grow up near any. So while I'm at it, maybe, sorry for jumping around, I'll tell you a quick story about Rachmaninoff, just to give you, I just did Rachmaninoff. So my grandfather, who, on my dad's side, my dad is not from Russia, my dad is from Southern Virginia, so very different, 8 generations of Southern Virginia. But my grandfather, Sam Buxton, who served, and he was in D-Day actually, which is the anniversary, yesterday, 80th anniversary. Before that, when he was a dental student in the 1930s in Richmond, Virginia, he had a part-time job as an usher at a concert series. And the likes of Fritz Kreisler, Joseph Hoffman, and Sergei Rachmaninoff performed in this series. I can't believe it. I would give my left leg to go back in time. So my grandfather was ushering for a recital with Rachmaninoff. And the boss said not to let anyone through some doors. So my grandfather stood guard, and suddenly someone tried to open the door. So my grandfather pushed back, and there was this kind of tug of war type thing. Well, wham, the door was kicked open, and it was Rachmaninoff himself. Rachmaninoff had a shaved head, and never smiled. Someone said he looked like an escaped convict. He was threatening. And my grandfather looked up, and I tell people, Rachmaninoff spoke to my grandfather. He said 5 words. You know what he said? He said, "Get out of my way." So I have this great personal connection to Rachmaninoff. Yeah. But anyway, back to the Dvorak. Sorry, I love crazy, silly stories. Maybe too much. So here's the songs my mother taught me about Dvorak. something that's a little, all these pieces I've been doing, they're somewhat on the mellow side, which I like, almost like some salon music. This next thing is not, I'm going to play an arrangement of Paganini's 24th solo violin caprice. The arrangement is by Franz Liszt and Ferruccio Busoni's double arrangement. More on that in a second. But so Paganini, well, first of all, I don't think I could do a violin program in good conscience without some Paganini. So Paganini lived at in the late 18th, early 19th centuries. He was a wild man, that's what I would say. The way he played violin, the music he wrote, the lifestyle he led, he was more probably like a rock star of today than what you think of as a classical musician. And for that reason, and you can imagine that Gossec piece I played in the beginning, he's coming into that world. And many people thought he was possessed because he was so wild and also had Marfan syndrome possibly. Because it was not only music, but the way he looked was very striking. He had this long, thin face of wiry hair. There's some paintings of him, and you get the sense of, he was just a very unusual person. But the Romantics, who came somewhat after Paganini, they took inspiration from him. They saw themselves in him, you could say. And maybe Franz Liszt was the first one to do that, because Liszt, in the 1830s, he's living in Paris. He was kind of a child prodigy before that, but by the 1830s, Liszt was actually kind of stuck in his life. He had fallen in love with a nobleman's daughter. It didn't work out. He was depressed. He was teaching a lot of piano lessons, and didn't sleep much. He was, he almost jumped in the Seine River at one point. It was gloomy for him. But one day he heard Paganini perform, and the rest is history. He was floored, and it was after that he locked himself up in a room for a few years to just practice incessantly, and became Franz Liszt in that period, you could say. He also read, while practicing, he was reading Dante and Shakespeare and Goethe, becoming educated simultaneously. So these Paganini studies of Liszt's, he did these during this period of seclusion after his inspiration of hearing Paganini, because he wanted to translate Paganini, the virtuosity, the fire, the devilishness, into the piano. So I'm going to play the sixth final study. Again, it's based on the 24th Caprice for solo violin, and this is a famous theme. He does variations on it. But you've probably heard it because after Liszt, so many Romantic composers used this as the basis for their compositions. Brahms did. Rachmaninoff did the Rhapsody on the theme of Paganini. Even Lutoslawski, 20th century modernist Polish composer. I mean, there's just so many composers incorporated this particular Paganini piece. So let me play the theme. It'll ring a bell because it's familiar. But this version is maybe not. So this is the theme. Familiar, right? Now, I said it's a double arrangement. Why? So Liszt did his initial arrangements of Paganini in the 1830s. Then in the 1850s, he revised them. This was common. And then at the turn of the 20th century, this great pianist and composer, Ferruccio Busoni. I love saying that because it gives off the impression that I can speak Italian. Ferruccio Busoni, it just sounds good. Busoni made his own version of this. I was thinking about this because in the old days, musicians were less obsessed with getting it exact, the urtext approach, which we have probably nowadays, the purity. In those days, for example, Mahler rewrote Mozart's symphonies, rearranged them for orchestra. So nowadays we'd say that's sacrilege. But I think it's fascinating to have access to both. So that's kind of what's happening here. Busoni does his own alterations to the original list, which was based on another piece that's based on another piece. So it gets confusing, but anyway, this is the Paganini list of zoning 24 degrees. Sullivan Bukowski, who passed away recently. Very sadly, he would always say, okay, you can play fast and loud, good for you. Now what about the quiet pieces? Always remember that. I always remember that. It was intimidating when I heard that. But so let's see. I'm going to play now a piece I never dreamed I would have done, but now I'm doing it. So this is the César Franck Violin Sonata. I'm going to do just the first movement, and it's arranged by Alfred Cortot, who is a Swiss-French pianist. And the reason I said I had the honor of playing this with one violinist recently, the original version. And I realized the piece is just, it's such an incredible piece. I wanted to experience it in this solo piano version. And so Franck was born in Belgium, spent most of his life in Paris. I think he was an organist in one of the Saint-Sulpice, or one of the big cathedrals in Paris. He was a great organist, by the way. And his life story is interesting because it's sort of the opposite of Mozart. If Mozart was this child prodigy who wrote from birth, well, Daddy helped a lot in early compositions, but still, and died at 35 writing all this incredible music. Franck started writing really his masterpieces after the age of 68. So all in his later years, he wrote all of these pieces. So he was, you call him a late bloomer, maybe. So this violin sonata is a conversation in the documentary about Sviatoslav Richter, great pianist. He played it with David Oistrakh. And Richter says, we played this sonata. He said, David Oistrakh viewed this piece as drawing room music. He said, for me, it's Marcel Proust in music. As somebody said, the moment you put the name Marcel Proust out there, you're going to come across as a pretentious person. But I'll put it out. So I examined why did he say that, and there's a great reason Richter said it, because in Swann's Way by Marcel Proust, there's a fictional violin sonata by a fictional composer named Van Toy. And it's heavily symbolic in the novel. And many people say that this is based on the Franck violins. That's what Proust had in mind. And for that matter, the piece is similar to Proust's writing, because Proust doesn't really write with a narrative or a plot. It's these long stream of consciousness like memories and almost like dream sequences, And this sonata is like that. It's not like a Beethoven or a Brahms sonata where you have, themes of development, like a regular novel with a plot and development of characters. No, it's just like Proust. It's just these long, drawn out, I call them flashbacks, or dream sequences. Some movies have those things. So that's what this piece, I think, is all about. And so this is the first movement of the Franck Cortot arrangement, violin sonata.
Next, I'm going to play a piece by French composer, another French composer, Massenet. This is a painfully famous piece, the Meditation from Thais, the opera of Thais. It's usually done on violin, and it's an interlude in the opera of Thais by Massenet. And the story of this opera, I've never seen it because it's rarely done. I think it's very difficult for the voice. Maybe Renee Fleming sang it, I've heard of it. Not many people sing it. It's not standard fare at the Met, I don't think. But this interlude is famous interlude for solo violin and orchestra originally. It shows up periodically throughout the opera. And the story of Thais is, she's a woman in Alexandria, Egypt, at the end of the Roman Empire. And she worships the goddess Venus. And there's an early Christian monk who seeks to convert her, and in the process falls in love. It's an opera after all, so you have to have it in there. So yeah, this is a solo piano version. It's not clear to me who did it. Maybe the composer himself, Massenet. Because usually with these arrangements, there's a clear, it's written in the score who did it, but this one is not. So this is a very famous piece, and here is the piano version. I keep thinking I wish I could have switched to violin, actually. But as I told you, I'm too lazy to do so because pretend that there's a violin here. Southern gospel pianist. I'm from New Jersey originally, but I find that around here it's effective. So, and I enjoy it, and I got into that music through my father. So my mother's Russian, but my father's from the South, and was always telling me growing up, because I loved classical music, he said, when are you going to play some real music? so finally, I think he's happy now with this thing. And but I mentioned this somewhere else. It was funny. I said I'm going to play something in the style of Mahalia Jackson, and somebody started laughing. I said, "Well, did you?" And I wondered, why did they laugh at Mahalia Jackson? Oh, maybe they thought I said Michael Jackson. I don't know. So, but Mahalia Jackson, of course, was a great classic, old school Southern gospel singer. Martin Luther King's favorite singer, and maybe one of the best musicians ever, in my opinion. So I'm going to do a little improvisation on the old hymn, "What a Friend We Have in Jesus," in a somewhat country gospel style. I don't know what you call it. But I don't sing, so that's another thing. And you might be thinking, well, do you play any real piano music? I do, actually. That Massenet I just played, by the way. There was another concert I did somewhere where a very nice lady came and she said, on second thought, I think it's much better put in a violin. I said, well, thank you very much for coming. But maybe it's the same with the gospel stuff too. But here's the logic that I love doing arrangements because I can pretend to be something I'm not, a violinist or a Mahalia Jackson-like gospel singer. But maybe, just maybe, the piano is like a prism, not prism, but prism that can do all those different things, hopefully, or at least emulate them decently well. So here is this improvisation I'm going to do on the refrain. gospel, Mahalia Jackson-inspired version of When the Saints Go Marching In. So attempting to do what she does, and I can't quite reach what her voice does. But the thing is that I didn't know this background about When the Saints, because it's such a famous song, it's such a famous thing. But it's an African-American spiritual hymn. And apparently it was sung very slowly originally, and it had many verses, and they're very dark verses, like apocalyptic and such. But what happened was it got to New Orleans at the turn of the 20th century, and the New Orleans brass bands started to play it, and they played it at funerals. And they started playing it in a more up-tempo way, the way we're more used to it, like the way Louis Armstrong sings it. And because funerals in New Orleans were not somber things; they were celebrations, and that's the crucible from which jazz was born. You watch the Ken Burns documentary about jazz. It comes from New Orleans at this time, and this song is one of the catalysts for it. So Mahalia Jackson was born in New Orleans, spent most of her life in Chicago, the gospel scene there. So she sang it in this style, which I'm trying to emulate here. So here it is. And thank you very much for coming and listening to some weird repertoire, some odd stories, and I appreciate you indulging me, letting me follow my nerdy pursuits and share pretending to be a violinist, and I guess now I'm pretending to be a gospel singer.
Yeah, and I totally agree. We are blessed. Yeah.
Thanks for coming. 10 o'clock. Birmingham. Oh, you are? Oh, thank you. Thank you. I remember you. How are you? Good to see you. I was. Now I'm doing this. Yes.
Tom Clark. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Nice to meet you.
Ted Wagner.
Ted Wagner.
That's
Awesome. Yeah, my job is to can't speak about art. But yeah.
So he's temporary. Just want to let you know you were really good.
Oh, I appreciate it. Yeah. Yeah.
No, he was expected.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for coming up.
Because I played Bible in school back when I was tell him that.
You still play?
Oh, yeah. I'm trying to connect with making things harder and harder. I play in a cat, having church support. I have a couple of violins too.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, the thing,
Oh, very good.
next week.
I think it's fine.
Okay.
Treat well with that. Oh, yeah, but yeah, if you tell them, I know Wendy left, but she, whoever's doing. Oh. Thank you very much.
Hello. Yes. Tom Clark, nice to meet you. Oh, my pleasure. Yeah.
Comment about the stage.